Mexico has been among the most important suppliers of crude oil to the United States.
Mexico is going to reduce by 100,000 barrels, and that would mean that they're 250 to 300 barrels short. We'd make up the difference. They would reimburse us at a later date.
Thanks to geographic proximity and traditional trade integration in North America, the country provides millions of barrels of heavy and medium crude oil annually to United States refineries. But trade policies can change at any time. Tariff maneuvers, especially those with slogans of protection or America first, have the potential to shake this relationship to its core.
From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
The United States administration imposing tariffs of up 25% on oil from Mexico, Mexican producers and trading firms are likely to abandon the United States market and turn to alternative routes, namely European and Asian refineries. This could radically change the flow of oil in North America and lead to new surprising paths on the global energy map. So, how is Mexico turning to Europe and Asia as an alternative to the United States market? What impact will this move have on United States energy needs and policies? First of all, it is important to look at the developments in Mexico's energy sector in recent years. For a long time, Mexico was loyal to a state-dominated oil system. However, with the 2013 to 2014 reforms, Pemex's monopoly position was partially broken, and foreign investors were given the opportunity to drill and produce. However, while production was expected to rise steadily, the numbers have not quite reached the desired level due to some field and infrastructure problems. Nevertheless, Mexico is still a prominent player in the world, with a daily crude oil production of around 1.7 to 1.8 million barrels. A significant portion of this production is extracted from coastal areas such as Campeche Bay and is mostly classified as heavy and medium gravity crude oil. Heavy crude is critical to the processing of asphalt and other thick products in United States refineries in Texas and Louisiana. But if the United States administration decides to impose a new tariff, the picture for Mexico would be complicated. For example, energy consultancies such as Wood Mackenzie analyzed a 25% tariff scenario and predicted that the flow of oil from Mexico to the United States would be severely reduced, and that Mexican producers would seek to recoup their costs by turning to the markets. Similar analyses provide a glimpse of how United States tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other sectors have altered trade flows. As Mexico looks for refineries to sell its heavy crude oil to, instead of the United States, it may set its sights on European and Asian markets. Likewise, with the finalization of the tariffs against Mexico, the Mexican administration is reportedly looking towards Europe and Asia. Mexico's relations with China are particularly favorable for such a trade. Considering that China has produced some joint scenarios with Mexico to overcome the United States tariffs, China could be the primary buyer for Mexican oil. On the other hand, both Europe's Mediterranean refiners have the capacity to process heavy crude, and Asia's refineries, especially China, and India's need medium-heavy crude. But such a shift comes with logistical costs and infrastructure challenges. Tanker shipments to Europe from terminals on Mexico's Atlantic coast are relatively more expensive than to the United States and involve a longer route. However, European refiners are generally familiar with heavy crude supplies from the Middle East or North Africa, and Mexican crudes could provide a new diversification in this market. Shipping to Asia is a longer distance. Shipping from Mexico through the Suez Canal or going around Cape Africa is challenging in terms of time and cost. Nevertheless, Asia can be reached via the Strait of Malacca or Suez, which adds transportation costs per barrel. If the United States tariff remains high, Mexican exporters may opt for the longer distance but tariff-free market logic. The Mexican government also faces a complex equation. Mexico is very dependent on the United States market for energy. More than 60% of the country's oil exports go to United States refineries. This is a long-standing arrangement under NAFTA, now USMCA. The border with the United States, the ease of transportation, and the calibration of refineries for Mexican crude oil made the market stable. If tariffs are imposed now, Pemex and other exporters will be less competitive in the United States market. The price differential and the tax burden would force refiners to look for other suppliers such as Canada or Venezuela. Mexico would then have to allocate its crude for different markets and compete with Russia or Middle Eastern countries in the Asian market. This possible break in North American crude oil flows could have a domino effect in the region. Canada is similarly considering the possibility of turning to Asia or Europe when it is affected by United States tariffs or restrictions. If both Canada and Mexico are cut off from the United States market in the same period, where will United States refineries get heavy crude oil? They may have to turn to sources like the Middle East or Venezuela, but Venezuela is still under sanctions. This would raise refinery costs in the United States, which would be passed on to consumer prices, fueling inflation. This would be a repeat of the scenario in the energy sector that happened with steel and aluminum tariffs during the Trump administration. Protectionism may protect domestic producers in the short term, but it will create problems for refiners and consumers. On the other hand, is it easy for Mexico to enter European and Asian markets? There are considerable challenges. First of all, sea freight rates will increase for tankers shipping from Mexican ports. Going through the Panama Canal to Asia is an option, but large tankers could get stuck in canal max limits or have to pay a more expensive transit fee. Going around Africa or using Suez is also an added expense. Also, how stabilized European or Asian refineries can process crude oil grades like Mexico's Maya or Isthmus requires a separate technical adjustment. Still, in the global energy market, buyers can be found for any type of oil as long as the price is set right. Mexico may have to sell crude at a lower price to offset United States tariffs, which means lost revenue. So a balance will be sought between costly tariffs in the United States market and transportation costs in Europe or Asia. Asian refineries, especially in China, India, and some Southeast Asian countries, rely heavily on crude oil from the Middle East. In recent years, they have also been buying from alternatives such as West Africa, Brazil, and Colombia. Mexican oil could also join the mix. Moreover, China or India could develop a political stance of buying from Mexico, which is in tension with the United States, as these purchases fit into a diplomatic move to diversify. This could increase Mexico's market share in Asia in the long run, but there are still logistical differences if there is no tariff-free trade facilitation. Nevertheless, if the United States does indeed raise tariffs to a high level, it is not unlikely that Mexico's Asia-focused strategy will make sense. On the European front, maritime transportation distance is again a barrier. But European refineries are looking for alternatives to heavy oil from the Baltic or the Middle East. While sanctions have been imposed on Russian oil as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war, Middle Eastern oil sometimes carries high prices and sometimes political risks. Can Mexico step into this gap? Geography is, of course, a disadvantage, but Europe, which wants to diversify its energy sources, may find affordable Mexican crude attractive. Moreover, the extent to which Mexico complies with green transformation and ESG criteria is a factor that European buyers will consider. The realization of all these possibilities depends on political developments in the United States. The tariffs may only remain a threat and not actually take effect. Washington could back down because tariffs would disrupt the United States domestic market, cause inflation, be opposed by oil industry lobbies, and affect consumers. However, we have already seen in the steel and aluminum case how the Trump-era rhetoric of protecting America at all costs can work. At that time, many countries, including Mexico, announced retaliatory tariffs. Trade flows were disrupted, and eventually partial recovery was achieved through agreements. If the same situation were to occur in the oil sector, there would be no shortage of diplomatic tension in Mexico-United States relations. Even though Mexico seems to be dependent on the United States, the largest oil consumption market in North America, it may be developing alternative market strategies and sending the message we will find our own destinations. After all, there is no vacuum in the global trade geography. If there is a shortage in one place, opportunities arise elsewhere. Mexico may also adopt the approach of, if the United States builds a wall, we will go to Asia and Europe. This may not be a win-win in many ways. Mexico will bear the transportation costs. United States refineries will struggle to find heavy oil. Consumer prices will rise. Perhaps countries like India and China will take advantage by buying Mexican oil at better prices. Perhaps the European Union would make new deals with Mexico as it looks for alternatives to Russian oil. This becomes a picture that Washington cannot control. Of course, the geopolitical terrain is very dynamic. OPEC, the Middle East, the Russian factor, Venezuelan crude oil, Canada are all pieces on a big chessboard. If Mexico closes the United States' door on this board with its Mayan crude oil, it is not at all unimaginable that it will sail from there to Europe and Asia. This development shows that economies like Canada and Mexico, which are closely integrated with the United States under USMCA, are looking for other avenues in the face of unilateral tariffs. While Canada is signaling alternatives to the United States through deepening trade agreements with Europe and the United Kingdom, Mexico may do the same with oil. In short, they are saying the United States market is great, but if the price of entry there is too high, we will change our course in other directions. Although geography and logistical issues make it difficult to look for other markets instead of the United States, there is always a way out, as global economic connections are improving. If Mexico chooses this route, refiners in Asia and perhaps some European countries could welcome Mexico with open arms to partially reduce dependence on the Middle East. Who knows, maybe the United States administration, recognizing these risks, will keep such a tariff move on paper but not in practice. Because otherwise, it is very likely that its own refineries would face a raw material bottleneck, and domestic consumers would revolt against the rising prices of petroleum products. Such is the nature of trade. When you take protectionist steps, you can help some sectors while hurting others. A strategic product like oil can make you feel the cost of imposing tariffs in a short time. How do you see this scenario? Could Mexico really shift to selling oil to European and Asian refineries, or is this just a threat rhetoric? If the United States insists on imposing tariffs, what difficulties will Mexico face? Would European and Asian refiners embrace Mexico's heavy oil? Or would they find it unattractive because of the high logistics costs? Perhaps the so-called every side loses trade war scenario is back on the table. Do not forget to share your comments with us below. We would appreciate your support by subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching and see you in our next broadcast. Goodbye.